All right, and I think we're all good to go. How are you, Murat?
Oh, doing just quite all right. Thanks for having me, Liz. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks for jumping on. So, for those of you who are new here and those of you who do know me, my name's Lyss. This is Game Over Winnipeg, and I'm joined by Atesh from The Athletic today. Almost called you Murat Athletic from The Atesh. Don't know what that would be like, but Murat is, longtime Twitter pal of mine, and he's it's always a privilege to be able to chat with him after a Jets game, jump on a podcast, talk with him, whatnot. We have something, good to talk about today, which is very exciting. So, very honored to have him joining me today. Really excited to talk some hockey with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on and let me, second it probably since your jet centric days. We've had a chance to talk a couple of times. Always a great chat, always interested in your insights too. And yeah, always good to have something good to talk about because when we used to have those conversations, it was during a couple of dark years for Winnipeg. And now they're sitting, tied with Seattle for the second best points percentage in the West, fourth best points percentage in the NHL, heading, out of that 20 game milestone with a playoff spot and within spitting distance of Dallas. I mean, these are better times than when we used to talk Jets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know. I would say a couple months ago I was still not feeling 100%, ready about this team, and I'm still wondering if there's something a little bit fraudulent about some of their record, but you know what? There's so much good going on. I'm getting so nitpicky with the things that I'm disliking that you know what? I will take that over being like everything is garbage.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go to the things that, sort of make some teams' records more of a paper tiger, more of a, hey, could this deflate at some point? Winnipeg has a few of those. I mean, Connor Hellebuck is not the only story this year, but he's stolen games. And if he returns to, very good instead of amazing, I mean, we've talked about that in Winnipeg forever. And I think he really is truly having a strong season. They're also a little bit inflated with the overtime points. um, that's one of the analytic things that you look at if teams are overperforming or underperforming their records. If teams are collecting a whole bunch of 3-on-3 points, which Winnipeg is, that's sometimes a sign that the record's inflated. But the Jets generally goal differential has been good, and for me, it's a case where an average or slightly above average team is doing everything that it needs to do on any given night, where they're beating the Chicago's, where they're not having collapses against these horrible teams. And maybe they play against Carolina, and that was a terrifying ending to a hockey game. They have to go in overtime because they give up three with Carolina's net empty. There are good teams who can do damage to the Winnipeg Jets. They're not one of the top five in the league, but they're good. I think they're pretty good, and I think that that's real.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that, and it's encouraging, it's exciting, and it makes you excited to talk about them kind of in the big picture of things. But then there are also more of these fun, small picture, isolated games that are fun to talk about. So what did you think of tonight's event?
I mean, fun to see the team that everyone who reads me for get a touchdown. People are going to be happy for sure. Um, I think that the big story heading in was the rearranged lines with all of a sudden Axel Jonsson Fjallby playing on essentially the top line with Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois. I had slightly been advocating for the Connor and Dubois reunion for a little while as well, and that's gone well. I think that combination of Blake Wheeler, Mark Scheifele, and Cole Perfetti, that's probably where I would, as much as it's cool that the bottom six generated offense, Saku Maenalanen with 2 goals, Jansen Harkins with a goal. I think one of the biggest stories is that a line with Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele paired on it dominated flow of play and controlled possession. And that hasn't always been the case in recent seasons. And I think they were full value for it. I thought Blake Wheeler was great on the forecheck. I thought his pass to Mark Scheifele for the goal was just perfect through skates, and it was great vision. And then Cole Perfetti's involved there too, because he needed a bounce back. In my way of thinking, he was benched against Dallas. He played, he didn't get a single second of ice time in the third period when Winnipeg played against Minnesota, not Dallas. Pardon me, against Minnesota 2 games ago. Then against Dallas, he got to play with Scheifele and Wheeler and was a scoring chance machine. And if those guys can take these 2 games and make them a big sample, I mean, that's something that is going to help the Jets get through their injury problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you think that were you surprised, I guess, to see Janssen Fjallby being the guy kind of brought up in that situation, given the injuries, obviously there's some movement going on in that top six. What did you think of that tonight?
I mean, I have to be honest. I was surprised completely. I was on the Illegal Curve show on Saturday morning. We were talking about, who comes in, who goes up, all those different sorts of things. And, one of the combinations I didn't imagine was Sam Gagner not playing. I don't know what all went into that particular decision. It looked pretty good though, and we've seen with Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois that the two of them can do the lion's share of work. We've seen them succeed with Evgeny Svechnikov on their wing. Svechnikov goes to the fourth line last year at times and disappears. I mean, he was terrific with that group, but there were two guys that were driving that bus in my way of thinking. Jansen Harkins even gets a couple of games with that group last year, scores immediately, things go well. So those two guys have something. And for me, as much as the theory early was Dubois and Wheeler would open up space for Cole Perfetti, that wasn't really the thing. I think Dubois opens up space for Kyle Connor, and Kyle Connor's speed opens up space for Pierre-Luc Dubois. And actually, Jonsson Fjallby, I mean, he gets to be the least impactful player on that line, and that's fine. But also, you saw him turn pucks over, which is what he does. And that line didn't dominate to my way of thinking, but they were very good. And you can watch Jonsson Fjallby all over the ice, making Jack Johnson puck carrying look a little bit too casual. Just winning battles and turning pucks over is what he does. And that helps when you're playing with two star level players like he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of my take on that too, is, a lot of, like you were saying, the bottom six having those goals and whatnot. All those chances, they come from being able to create that possession for yourself. And, if he's able to be that, strong forechecker, hard on those pucks and able to create some of those turnovers, you have those guys on that line that are able to really capitalize on those chances. And, like Nick said in the chat, really create offensively, which is great. So, I thought it was interesting. And the Sam Gagner scratch, I agree. It wouldn't have been my choice either, and it wouldn't have been what I expected either, because sometimes what we think is going to happen versus what we would like to happen is different. In neither case did I think that was going to be the play they were going to make. But yeah, do you think he comes back in next game, or what do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, I guess, here's the honest thing, Lyss, is that when I was asked what should happen, I thought Saku Maenalanen was the guy that should come out. I liked Jonsson Fjallby as a forechecker, winning battles for other people and just putting the puck into hands of more dangerous players. I thought Sam Gagner had acquitted himself well playing with the skill in that top group. Harkins and Asimont have developed something with Adam Lowry there, and I was kind of liking it. So I thought to myself, well, Mainalanen's the guy that's going to sit. And lo and behold, he goes out, he scores 2 goals. One of them is a rocket, just a wrist shot beauty. The other one comes off of a situation where it's tremendous forechecking from Winnipeg's fourth line. But for me, also in that moment, you have another case of Jack Johnson, the analytics non-darling. He just dusted off a puck. He went back on the puck retrieval. He had possession. He had time. He had space. And he made like 3 touches tentative. Maybe he was trying to get it to lay flat. I'm not sure. But it was slow, and Winnipeg's forecheckers were fast, and then boom, it's in the back of the net. And I don't know that any one of these guys is going to be a world beater for the Winnipeg Jets, but that they have at least enough players to have that sort of impact is a good sign. And maybe now it's Dominic Toninato that comes out of the lineup, because he's not the one who scored 2 goals, even though he might have a piece of it.
Yeah, totally. No, for sure. It's definitely hard to scratch someone after they score 2. And I think, yeah, like you're right, it probably would have been a lot of people's guide just based on, not that he's doing anything inherently wrong, but that sometimes, if you're not doing enough, quote unquote, right, or if you're not doing anything to make yourself stand out, that, it's just not quite enough to keep you in the lineup. There are other guys coming back from injury and whatnot. And speaking of, were you expected to see Morgan Barron in tonight, or what were your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. I think he said to the reporters in Chicago that, yes, his timeline was officially between 4 and 5 weeks. He was a little optimistic, and he knows everybody's always optimistic that he could beat it. And I think that from his surgery to now, it's 3 weeks and 2 days, if I caught what he said exactly. So,
November 4th, I think he said. So, yeah, about tracks.
That about tracks. Sharp mind, sharp memory.
There you
go. So I remember Rick Bowness saying that maybe Tuesday would be an option, and that was kind of what I'd earmarked in my mind. So for Barron to come back now, a little bit surprised. It does feel early, and not only is it a good sign in sort of the short micro sense, I guess, talking to an economics student. I got to get my micros and macros to straight. Um, I think that a general return to health and knowing that these guys were just a little bit away, eventually they'll get Appleton back and Winnipeg's winning at this time as a general rule. I think that one of the stories is, does Kevin Cheveldayoff feel pressure to add a forward right now? And I know because one of the corollaries to today's story of Barron's return to health is Ville Heinola returning to the AHL. And I know you will have listeners and you will have viewers who are, who are ready for a veteran to move out, for Heinola to step in, all of those sorts of things. And maybe that's the way that a forward gets added to this group. But if you're Kevin Cheveldayoff right now, you're watching the wins come in, you like the offense you just got from your bottom six, there's a bit of a plug and play, mix and match vibe going on, and you still have Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele scoring. I mean, sure, it's Chicago, but you've beaten other better teams lately as well. And I think that buys the Jets time. I don't think there's a panic move or a roster tweak or even just that proactive use of cap space. You know what I mean? I don't know that there's pressure to do that right now. So you asked me if I was surprised about Morgan Barron's return. The answer is yes. And I guess I'm thinking about it as a symbol of everything else that's going on around Winnipeg's schedule right now.
Totally, yeah. I kind of want to challenge you a little bit on that, the pressure of bringing in a top six forward, right? Because I think that is a continuous theme that we see in a lot of people, whether it be through Twitter or just kind of the general gaps when you look at a lineup, right? Because you're talking about, how the Jets are faring with points percentage and all these kinds of things. Like, they are doing well. So it's always the question of, this early in the season, what can we do to be better? And I think that's what a lot of people, obviously goaltending is not an issue. The defense seemed to be, that doesn't seem to be the biggest issue either. Like, it looks like maybe just a little bit more generation from those top two lines. Obviously, Kyle Connor not scoring at a pace that people were expecting. And obviously goals and points aren't everything. But, at the end of the day, the more pucks you put in the net, the higher your chances are of winning the game. So do you think there should be some pressure on Kevin Cheveldayoff to bring people in right now? Or do you, anticipate there being enough internal fixes? Or do you think it's more of a trade deadline move type of thing? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you're optimizing for, in my way of thinking. And I have to think that Winnipeg's overall goal is what its fans' goal is right now, which is make it to the playoffs, compete for a Stanley Cup. And I don't think that you hire a veteran coach unless you're trying to win. I don't think you keep all of Scheifele, Wheeler, Dubois, and all of that, after the summer Winnipeg just had. If you're not trying to win relatively immediately, I've wondered to myself sometimes, and nobody in the organization has told me this, nor would they ever, that economics are a driver this season as well, that make it to the postseason, now you're one of 16, anything can happen, and probably they genuinely believe in the quality of their team. Like, this may be Winnipeg just thinking, hey, we're a pretty good team, we're more or less winning, let's go. And I guess why I'm saying that is, I think that the fans at the end of the day are going to say, well, why not try to be even better? Like, what would possibly stop you from that if you have the option? And so the pressure on that comes, in my mind, to what kinds of deals Chevy would have on the table. And I think there's tremendous pressure in my mind to be working those phones and to have a sense of what's available. There are a lot of teams that need defensemen. He's rich in defensemen, or at least it feels like he is. And Winnipeg, even before folks got hurt, if you were looking to upgrade, you'd probably look for another impact forward in that top nine. So it fits. If you're looking at ways to tweak the lineup, it absolutely fits. I just don't see Winnipeg making that move at this stage of the season while they're winning. Even at the trade deadline, I think we'd have to see Winnipeg's record. Like, right now, what I think is that Winnipeg has a very good record and is a reasonably good team. If they maintain their very good record all the way through the trade deadline, then maybe that pressure to buy comes again, because Winnipeg really only has this year, maybe two more, or maybe 2 years, pardon me, with the Hellebuyck, Scheifele, everything together sort of window. And that's what will ratchet the pressure. Is probably success will increase the pressure a little bit more than the injuries right now.
Right, yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense too. And I also think that the whole concept of, yeah, like you said about, be one of 16 and then anything can happen is so real when you have a goalie of the caliber of Connor Hellebuyck, right? Because I think, if you look at the past X number of Stanley Cup champions and you look, I would venture to say that Darcy Kemper is the worst goalie to win the Stanley Cup in the last 10 years, right? Like every single team's got, the hot Jordan Binnington, the hot Corey Crawford at the time, the hot Matt Murray. Like they all have those guys who come alive at the right times. And if the Jets are able to, sustain a performance of this type of caliber up until then, who knows where he can bring them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I get that you'd want to increase their odds of being good, right? Like with goaltending being such a variable thing, I know that goalies have tremendous seasons and some of them are more likely to have good seasons than others. See Connor Hellebuck, see Shesterkin, Vasilevsky, even though he started kind of middling so far. There are a few of them that you can bet on to have better seasons than others. If you just roll the dice on any 2 week period, there are plenty of times when below average goalies are hotter than the best ones in the entire NHL for these like small sample size moments. So by having Hellebuck, all you're doing is you're nudging the odds that your guy's great at the right time because he's ever so slightly more likely to be great than anyone else is, which is just a roundabout way of saying, yeah, if anybody can get hot, Hellebuck is one of those guys. And then you do want to shore things up. And I think it would be an absolutely horrendous mistake if Cheveldayoff isn't on the phones. I think that you have to look at that sort of stuff. I'm wondering if maybe one thing that's happening is as desperate as teams are for defensemen, they may see Winnipeg's issues with the Nikolai Ehlers injury and perceive Winnipeg as just as desperate up front. So how good are those prices now, several months in advance of the trade deadline? And then probably in the back of an old school guy's mind like Cheveldayoff is the old adage, you can never have enough defensemen. And I go back to 2006, I guess, another one of those goalies get hot at the right times with Cam Ward winning the Stanley Cup. The only reason to my mind that Carolina made the Stanley Cup finals is because the Buffalo Sabres went from having 7 very good defensemen to something like 2 over the course of the Eastern Conference final. And I think that that's an adage that is really stuck in a lot of veteran NHL people's minds, is that don't be those guys.
Yeah, no, and I think that does make a lot of sense too. And if you think about it like logistically from pretty much any context, whether it's, hockey, other sports, or just in general, looking at the concept of why would I want less assets of value, right, kind of thing. So I get that in that perspective, but it's looking at, kind of maximizing what they mean to you at that given time. Looking more, if we're going with our economics terms, more micro back at this game, do you think that, if you're looking at some of the particular numbers, obviously advanced stats have a lot of, things that play into them. And sometimes with individual game stats, they can be a little bit more skewed just to the nature of the small sample and stuff like that. But generally speaking, tonight's micro stats didn't look as dominant as the 7-2 box score. Do you have any kind of insight on that? Do you kind of know, what do you think sort of went wrong per se? I don't think that that's the right word to use when you win 7-2 against a division rival, but that being said, there's always room for improvement like we were kind of saying before. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought especially in the first half of the game, some of Winnipeg's, old problems with managing the puck over its own blue line were an issue. I think that you saw times where, like Winnipeg against Chicago, the Jets to get into trouble have to beat themselves a little bit. And I feel like I'm being a little bit rude to the quality of the Chicago Blackhawks as a hockey team. And, within the NHL, things are reasonably close no matter where you are in the standings, parity and all of that. At the same time, I really feel about the Winnipeg Jets in a game like this, things are going to go well if they do things right. And you even saw it maybe towards the end of the game too. After Pierre-Luc Dubois' goal, one of the next plays in his own end was an extremely casual play with the puck that leads to one of Connor Hellebuck's biggest saves of the night. And I think that there are moments in a hockey game when the Winnipeg Jets, fewer moments this year than in any of years past, but where they kind of get caught up in their hype and in their like run up field, run up the ice sort of mentality, and they turn pucks over at their own blue line, and their exit passes get weak and they sort of create some of their own mistakes. So I think that's the sort of thing that leads to some of the shots kind of coming their own way as well, even if once they got out of their own way, they're rushing back up ice and they're doing good things with it.
Yeah, definitely. I think, if I think about, I want to say 2 games ago, there was one particular penalty kill that the Jets were on, and they, gave up a power play goal, one of their first in a while, because our penalty kill's been not so bad. But, Mark Scheifele was killing the penalty, and it was that quick step into the offense, and then, it gave more room for the opposing team to come in and score that goal. And sometimes I feel like that offensive mindset sometimes acts to your own detriment, even though obviously when you have these really strong offensive players, you want them to be able to do what they're good at. But I think there's almost, I don't know, would you say it's worse or better to look at a game and be like, a lot of the issues and plagues came from their own doing? It wasn't like, is it good that, it's not other teams that are outdoing that for them, or is it bad because it's harder to fix things that are your own problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's a very philosophical one. I mean, there are some things in hockey that even if you know are coming, you cannot stop. And once upon a time, Winnipeg had that in the form of its power play with Patrick Laine as one of the shooters, right? Everybody knew he was, yeah, sorry for your poor heart. Everybody knew he could shoot the puck. Everybody knew where his office was, but because Scheifele was where he was and Bufflin was where he was, who cares what the game plan is? If Winnipeg gets its pass and Blake Wheeler made those passes, Winnipeg was going to be a threat to score. And so knowing what the issue was didn't help a lot of teams sort it out because it was such an overpowered thing. Other times, other examples might be Kyle Connor on your average breakaway. He has so many moves in his toolkit that even though he's great, there's nothing you can do about it. Pierre-Luc Dubois barreling down the wing, you can know exactly what he's trying to do, but how many defensemen can stop him cutting to the net if he really wants to get there? So for me, I mean, I would always like a team to have as many of those unstoppables, even if they're coming kind of in on their own side. And I'd like to think that because puck management is the sort of thing Winnipeg can control, or at least the mistakes that it makes on that front are, it starts with the puck on their own stick. So it's a decision they make, it's a read they make, etc. And conceivably, I'd like to think that if it's a read, that's the sort of thing that can be improved. And I think like the ultimate philosophical answer is a really vague one, which is it depends on if it is improving. If you see it improve. And I think that Winnipeg is improving. I think that there are stretches when they get really quite bad. See the Colorado game earlier this year, see the LA Kings game that Winnipeg won in LA earlier this year. And I think that we're seeing those stretches less and less, or at least if that trend is not lowering still, the level that we've landed on is still less than what it was last season or in some of Winnipeg's really difficult ones. So I think you'll sort of take it, I think, is my view.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm just going to take a quick pause here to do a quick ad read from our friends at Sports Interaction. So I want to say, think you know what way it's going to go? Make your bet with Sports Interaction, whether it's World Cup, hockey, football, or basketball. Sports Interaction has you covered. Bet pregame, live and play, or on one of our many prop bets. Sports Interaction makes it easy to deposit, play, and cash out. Join now and see what all sports betting has to offer. Want to bet? Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. That's sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. 19 plus, please play responsibly. I was looking at this ad read before we started, and I was like, I saw World Cup, and I was like, no, I don't even want to talk about this. It's my heartbreak of the day. But you know what? Dolphins win, Jets win, big touchdown day with the 7 goals. So I was like, you know what? We'll be okay with it. But bit of a crushing one today, this morning, with Team Canada there. But at least we had the Jets game to talk about later.
I mean, what, do I bite my tongue? Do I talk? I don't know what to say. I mean, I think Canada effed around and they found out. I think that's all. Croatia's a very good team. Their midfield has been amazing for a long time. As old as it is, you could never count them out as potentially great for stretches, and they created problems Canada couldn't. Whatever. I think Canada found out, and I hope that they win against Morocco.
Yeah, well, this group sure had a lot of storylines today, but yeah, no, Man, oh man, I fell asleep during the soccer game. I woke up really early this morning, and I fell asleep when it was 1-0 Canada, and I woke up and it was 4-1, and I was like, is this hockey or is this soccer? I was like, 4 goals, what the heck? But yeah, so that was a little bit heartbreaking. But back to the Jets, because this is a hockey show. I know we could sit here and talk about the most random sports for hours, because big sports fans over here. But did you like the first line tonight of the Perfetti, Scheifele, Wheeler. I know you spoke specifically about the one goal where Wheeler had a nice little pass there, that awkward angle and whatnot. Do you like that combination? Do you think it's a short-term fix while we're waiting for Ehlers to get back, or what do you think of that line specifically?
I do like it. It's first what we've seen 2 games from them now. Their first period against Dallas was sensational as far as I'm concerned. It was a little bit the Cole Perfetti show, which we haven't seen a lot of in the last recent stretch of games. But the just the thinking on Wheeler and Scheifele's part, on Perfetti's part as well, seems to be on the same page. They seem to have chemistry in terms of which cuts they're making in the offensive zone. They seem to be working hard as well in terms of turning pucks over and just being quick to get the puck back as soon as they've lost it. There were a couple moments where I thought I saw the first casual back checks of Mark Scheifele's recent history. I think he's been so good this season, to be honest. But there were moments tonight where Blake Wheeler's busting his butt back on 2-on-1s and getting sticks on the rebound attempt, and all of a sudden, a chance is negated because the 36-year-old former captain is tracking back as hard as he is. And I think that they've got a little bit of everything. I don't have an argument that it should stay together if you have a healthy Ehlers right away. I think that he immediately busts into the top 6, but maybe Ehlers joins the other group in this 12 weeks from now fantasy scenario. For now, I worry about the line defensively, but they haven't given us enough to worry about in 2 games, and I think they could outscore their problems as a general rule.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, yeah, Mark Scheifele has just been a highlight all year, right? Like, I think, and, when you're watching him, like, I remember in previous years, particularly last year, there's just every time you'd watch him, if he didn't have the puck on his stick, you would just be sitting there wondering, what the heck? Like, I wonder if this guy watches tape and he goes home and watches himself and you're like, oh, yeah, that looks good. Because he just looked a little bit kind of all over the place. The effort sometimes looked like it might have been lacking when his team didn't have possession, all that kind of stuff. I've seen significantly less of that this year. I think everyone has, and I think it's starting to show across the board. He looks great. And I think that, like you said, from what we know about those players, yeah, maybe there is some room for worry as far as, defense. But what I always say is, don't have to worry about defense if he can always have the puck. So if he can, focus on that and they can continue to, continue with this trend of the last couple of games, more than happy about that. Thoughts on the power play? I saw some movement of a couple of those guys, particularly Connor being stationed a little bit more on the opposite side, a couple of other changes, especially with personnel as well. Any thoughts on the power play tonight?
I mean, the number one takeaway I have is probably Kyle Connor's shot. And there are on his goal, I should say. And there are times when I worry that Kyle Connor doesn't take enough one-timers. Like I see him dust it off a little bit when he's on his off wing and has the opportunity. And I think that slows the Jets power play down. Now, of course, Kyle Connor knows what his options are and he sees the lanes and he's a phenomenal scorer and all of those sorts of things. But every once in a while, I catch myself as an observer thinking, just rip the freaking thing, and you're going to earn more respect and space in other areas of the ice. And he tore into that. That was, that was a blast that I thought was symbolic of what Kyle Connor needs to do to have even more success on the power play. Beyond that, I guess, you got Blake Wheeler making his resurgence onto the top unit and what have you. The rest, I almost don't know what to say. I've been lukewarm on Winnipeg's power play so far this season, but then it helped them win an important game tonight. And I mean, that's all I can. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, Murat made a couple good points there, but the only thing that I took away from that was, oh my gosh, guys, Murat is a noted shoot guy. No, there were a couple on that 5-3 on particular tonight. There was one point where Blake Wheeler, I was like, oh my gosh, shoot the puck. I almost said it out loud. I didn't. I don't say shoot. I don't say it. But there were a couple times tonight where I was like, oh my gosh. But you even know when you're, and I'm not going to pretend that I've ever played at any league of the caliber of the NHL or anything. But as a player, you're always like, okay, where's the best scoring chance? And you're there, and you're like, it could be me, but probably not. So let's see what I can do with it. But sometimes it's just, when you're watching objectively from the, nice top, you have a whole view of the whole rink. You're like, what are you doing? Like, shoot the puck. But yeah, the power play in particular, I feel like there's room for some growth there, I think is all I'll say on that. And I think it sounds like you're in agreement on that. And, if they're continually, willing to be creative with it and see, what makes sense and look for the right fit, I'm all for it. That's all what I'm all about is, continuing to trial and error things while the stakes are relatively, I don't want to say low because the stakes are never low, but, earlier on in the season, figure out what's good, throw whatever at the wall, see if it sticks, and hopefully they can, continue to generate some success there because, like you said, in nights like tonight, it can really help you cement those wins.
Yeah, and my fantasy power play involves like every player in a position where they can attack in a couple of different ways. And, for a player like Kyle Connor, he has about 18 different ways that he can hurt you in an offensive situation. We've seen him play, the bumper beside the net, and he can take one-timers at the side of the net, just to, tap in sort of situations. He's attacked the front with the between the legs shot that some guys like to try. We know that he can shoot, so you like to see what you saw tonight. He's a good playmaker as well, and I think that he's a good symbol of power play success for me because the more variety in tools that you show, I think, the more that PKs have to guess and have to respect various different options. And I think that shot should earn him, a little bit more respect in terms of, okay, if guys suddenly start jumping out at him to try to take out that shooting lane, maybe there's somebody down low he can pass to as well. Mind you, as I say all of that, theoretically, it all makes sense. But maybe if you're a defenseman trying to cover Kyle Connor on the power play, you're already, regardless of scoring streak or slump, taking that extra step to him. And maybe that's moved. But he's just a great symbol because you think about Blake Wheeler on the other side, all of the playmaking in the world. And he's been so good on the power play for so many years because he's such an elite passer. Well, if he could shoot like Kyle Connor could or Mark Scheifele could or what have you, I think there would be even more available to him. And he's not a one-trick pony there because he has so many different lanes and things, but he's closer to one than a Scheifele or a Connor would be.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at, Tuesday, another division game against, not to disrespect the Chicago Blackhawks, but to disrespect the Chicago Blackhawks, a much stronger opponent. What are you looking to kind of see continue or maybe fix up? I know we didn't talk much about the defense, but, some of the particularly I thought, Dylan and Pionk had a pretty good game. I haven't been a huge fan of all I've seen from Pionk this year, and I thought tonight he looked good. I was really glad to see DeMello back. Morrissey, I thought, had a quieter evening, but, not in a bad way by any stretch. Across the board, what are you looking for? Are you bringing Gagne back in? Are you switching anything up? Or what are your thoughts on Tuesday?
I mean, yeah, the Gagne thing, I'm not sure. Do you mess with the winning lineup or what have you? And I think part of it might depend on what degree if he's banged up at all. I mean, if he's dealing with a bruise or this or that or the other thing, we might not hear it as anything other than just a healthy scratch and a lineup choice. But if there's something there to monitor, maybe that plays into it. Honestly, the truth is I don't know, and I think it went well enough that I wouldn't begrudge the Jets coaching staff for going back with the exact same lineup. Defensively, I think one of the ways that Winnipeg got burnt and they continue to get burnt, is those 50-50 pucks off of rebounds in the slot. I think the Jets are slow and not strong when it comes to those box outs and taking guys' sticks away or what have you. So, I think Nate Schmidt was culpable on one of them. I think Isamont was the other one kind of on scene in that moment. And we've seen lots of goals against this year where there's a play that maybe a Dustin Byfuglien gets to, let's say. And it's not just size. Logan Stanley isn't necessarily a whole lot better at that play than Josh Morrissey is, let's say. But it is about winning that moment. And, the Jets have struggled there. They're probably going to be faced with more of those moments with pucks in front in dangerous spots, I think, on Tuesday than they were today. So that would need to improve. I also think against some of the top competition, they're really fast. They're really great teams, the ones towards the top of the standings, like they'll be playing on Tuesday. That's when that pass that gets you over the blue line is such a big deal. And for me, if I could hack hockey, if I could invent a thing that just made you better at one thing, it would be a way to get teams out of their own zone better. It would be all about the blue lines, exits and entries over and over and over again. And because I think the entries are dependent partly in what happens on the exit, I think getting the puck and getting it out of the zone with possession is number one. And, Winnipeg struggled with that against Colorado early this season. They struggled with that against Los Angeles, against Vegas. And the games when it was the Connor Hellebuck show, that was the issue. It wasn't that Winnipeg couldn't do things at other times in the game, but it's that you'd see giveaways and trouble spots getting out of its own zone. So what I want to see is just quick decisions and good ones, and ones that admit that you don't have to, flee the zone and create a rush every single time you've got the puck.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you talked about that net front thing is always something that, is kind of frustrating to watch. And someone who I think is better at it than people give him credit for is Ville Heinola. And I know we touched on it super briefly, but what would be an Alyssa talking about hockey segment in any capacity if he didn't get brought up? Quick thoughts on him?
Yeah, what to say? I agree with you. First of all, I think he's meaner and a better positional box out player than he gets credit for. You see so many of his detractors say, "Hey, he's small," and you know what? He is. But if you look, like, my guess is, if you look at a whole video spree of Ville Heinola in those 50-50 moments with the puck sort of like floating its way through the slot, he doesn't do markedly worse than a Logan Stanley, which is absurd because Logan Stanley has the strength advantage. And part of that is competitiveness and compete levels, to use the words of the hockey men. But part of it is also just having a head on a swivel and making the read and knowing that the puck's in the neighborhood. And like, this leads me to another one of my pet rants, I guess. Sometimes you see people post heat maps and say, well, look at all these scoring chances from the middle of the ice. This player is good in the middle of the ice or bad in the middle of the ice. Like, a defenseman with lots of scoring chances against him from the center slot must be bad in the center slot. Maybe not. Maybe it's something happening elsewhere on the ice that's helping the puck get to the center slot. Maybe they don't protect their blue line and they're dealing with more defensive zone shifts in the first place. Maybe it's giveaways. It might not be that moment. And I think that that's part of why, say, a Logan Stanley isn't a defensive juggernaut, despite his physical strength as well. Look at that. I complain about this, Lyss. When I tweet Ville Heinola and somebody else has like a rant about Logan Stanley, or I tweet, hey, Logan Stanley made a really nice play on this, like, great exit pass, look at that rush he set up, and then I get the Ville Heinola, like, that's a pet peeve. And look at what just happened. I played right into it. You said Ville Heinola, I said Logan Stanley. I think Ville Heinola is a better defensive player than he gets credit for. I think he's rounding into form. I think that his quest to prove that he's too good to play in the AHL is, honestly, it was mission accomplished last season in my mind, but with Rick Bowness being a fresh set of eyes on that, and Heinola's camp being mediocre in my mind, and I believe in the player. I didn't like his training camp. I think we're seeing Ville Heinola be the closer to the best version of himself, and now he's waiting for the he's Kyle Connor in 2017, waiting for, was it Matthew Perreault to get hurt that led to Kyle Connor's call up, and all of a sudden he was ready for the NHL, and he wasn't 2 weeks ago. Hanola's not that good. We're not going to say
Hanola's going to score 30 goals. Okay, I'm in.
Yeah, that's a dangerous assessment comparison to make.
I know exactly.
People think I'm thinking he's like a top pair guy, but what my point is he's waiting for that elusive opportunity, and because it's NHL hockey, it's going to be somebody getting hurt. They're not going to trade Brendan Dillon to make room for Ville Heinola, who's on his entry-level contract still and waivers exempt still, trade requests and agents' displeasure and all of that. It's just, Winnipeg can sit on that if they want to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, for sure. And cracks me up with the Logan Stanley, Ville Heinola thing. I'm the worst for it, but it's also like someone could be like, oh, global warming. I'd be like, okay, so Ville Heinola, no. So I definitely get it. But, I don't think it's an unreasonable thing to, your brain sometimes goes there, right? Because you're looking at, situations, and it's at the beginning of the year, it was the sixth defenseman, you had the 5 locks, you're looking at the other, and it's just kind of natural. We Pavlov dogged ourselves into looking at, Ville Heinola, Logan Stanley, and they're always associated. So, you know what? You're off the hook for this one. Nick in the chat says that I've cracked Murat. Well done. So, thanks for coming on, Murat. Appreciate you jumping on, having a chat with me. Always a good time to talk about the team and, look at, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone in the chat. Make sure you like the stream, share the stream, and check it out if you want to, re-listen to everything we had to say, rants aside. We'll be out on podcasts sometime tonight or tomorrow. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in.